I'm delighted to welcome to the stage to give us our opening keynote address, Bandana Tewari, who is the editor-at-large of Vogue India and contributor of Business and Fashion, and some of them you were all been waiting to hear from. Please, Bandana.
Namaste, how are you? Everyone's asking me, why do we have to talk about passion and compassion in fashion right now? And here we are in the next few days, you're going to be learning so much about high-tech involvement, tech innovations in fashion, sustainable practices and products that are really fashion-forward. I saw a bit of it yesterday, and it's baffling how quickly the industry is changing. But I also believe that we have to go back and see, what is it? How do we become good consumers? So as high-tech as we get, we need to get highly emotional about our involvement as consumers. So you have the technology rising in one side, but the involvement that comes from your ideology, your belief, has to be equally important. And we forget, because we're moving so fast in the tech world. It's amazing, which I absolutely love. But we're moving so fast, we forget that there are faceless people who are part of our industry, producing, creating, manufacturing, that we don't acknowledge. So therefore, let's talk about passion and compassion. Just a few years ago, because I'm sick and tired of looking at big international brands using amazing crafts from India, accessories, embroideries, you name it, and not giving credit to craftspeople who live in tiny little villages. And all the crafts, the handmade fabrics that come from my part of the world, they come from villages. They're all big village economies. India, in fact, is 88% rural India. So the cosmopolitan cities is a very small, minuscule part of the country. So we did a project with Vogue India, which is called Project Renaissance. I traveled all over India, went to tiny little villages, met artisans, lived in their homes, and picked out fabulous handmade fabrics. And you're going to see. And I asked 32 international designers that included everyone from Burberry to Gucci, to tell them, we are going to present you with this beautiful handmade fabrics. Can you make something out of it? Now, big brands, they don't want to go outside their DNA. They don't like to do that at all. But I was in Taipei, in the digital city of Taipei, to interview Christopher Bailey, who was the creative director of Burberry, and I asked him, I said, can I show you some pictures? I finished my interview with him about digital and 180 immersion and what have you. And I said, can I show you some pictures? I was in a little village of weavers in India, and you have to see what they do. They're little kids, they go and play cricket, 16-year-old boys, they play cricket, then they come home and they weave. Fabrics like this, all handmade weaves. They weave, then they go and jump into the river, then they come back home and they weave. It's such a big part of their lives. It stands there right next to their kitchen. So I showed him the photos and he said, I love it. And he made the classic Burberry trench in what is called Maheshwari silk, which is from the middle of India. It's, I'm going to keep scrolling down and show you, like, while this is Burberry, if you look, it says Burberry on top, and what is below, for Maheshwari silk, is the name of the fabric. And they're all handmade, handloom. And this is the power of, and to tell you the truth, you see only Burberry here. But do we see the face of the faceless people who are actually weaving? So that's why we need to talk about passion and compassion, because ultimately we need to have transparency and a voice across the entire spectrum. And we talk about that when you're talking about circular economy. We need to do this even in the creative field. Who are these weavers who sit there and produce this? So this is what Gucci did with, there are only 2 families left in India that does this double ikat weave, which is scientific beyond. And Gucci was so scared, the designer called up and said, I can't cut it. I can't cut it because, it's heirloom. It is vintage. It is tradition. So they put 1 seam on it and turned it into a resort Gucci dress. This is Ferragamo with Indian brocade. This is DKNY for, again, Baluchari. If you look around, there's a narrative that happens around the cloth, which is from the epics, one of India's glorious epics called the Ramayana. And so the whole story is woven into your cloth. Then you have Missoni, which is this beautiful fabric that is handmade, completely handmade. And they couldn't believe that I got them that fabric, which looked exactly like a Missoni fabric. Well, there you go. That's Christian. You know, he used beautiful South Indian silks to make the shoe. Now, this is Roberto Cavalli. And this is the ingenuity of Indian craftspeople. Like, you look at this dress, it's actually a sari, and you see these little dots. And this technique is called tie-dye. What you have to do is tie and dye. So every little dot that you see is a mustard seed that is tied and dipped and dyed. So you have thousands of these mustard seeds that excruciatingly a woman will sit on the floor and dip it in tie-dye. I mean, if this is not luxury, what is? So if you ever go to Rajasthan, make sure that you know that the smaller the dots, the more valuable this cloth, which is called the bandhani. This is Hermes that use the Bengali kantha, which is a poor man's stitch. It's like a top stitch. So when they couldn't afford, the poor people couldn't afford to have a blanket for a newborn child, they would pick up scraps and do their top stitch and put the scrap all together. And isn't it ironic that Hermes, one of the biggest luxury brands in the world, uses this? This is Pucci. Again, this is handmade fabric from the north of India. This is Stella Jean, who uses her African roots with the Indian. Charlotte Olympia. Okay. So this is the country I come from. And this is just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of what it has to offer in terms of handicrafts. We have about 11 million people who work with their hands in the handicraft business. So we are talking about phenomenal arts and crafts. So, but it's not just about my country. I thought, how do we talk about a collaboration that goes beyond? So talk about passion, but passion, passionately collaborative. So where can we go with that? So I got 6 countries that are all of India's neighbors involved. That was Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Okay, you'll see there's 6 countries. And I sent the frame of a jacket to one designer who would work on it. There were 6 designers in 6 countries, several artisans from all the countries, and they had never met each other. So they would work on one jacket, pack it up, the same jacket would be worked on, and it made a journey. So it was called the traveling jacket. This is in Colombo. So if you see the shoulder, the way she did the shoulder is a traditional Sri Lankan way of making shoulders for the royal family, because they had to look like the trunks of elephants. And that was very regal. And of course, made in their indigenous fabric. Then it goes to Delhi, where the Indian designer is very influenced by Escher. And he starts working on the embroidery. Then it goes to Dhaka. And Dhaka, she uses, the fabric is called Dhakai. Dhaka gets its name from this. It's a UNESCO-protected fabric now. And she works on that. Then it goes to Nepal. In Nepal, I couldn't find a designer. But I found this wonderful jewelry designer who took the bones of animals that were sacrificed in the big temples of Kathmandu, and she took the bones and made them into buttons and belts and used the Buddhist lotus motif. And she said she did this to give dignity back to the animals that were sacrificed by human beings. And it was fascinating because these designers just kept putting their own. And she also worked with Nepalese artisans. Then it goes to Bhutan. In Bhutan, Chimichodan used the kira, which is their very, very traditional garment worn by the matriarchs of the families. And she used a traditional kira. And again, it's all about female empowerment. When you wear that, you become the matriarch of the family. So she used it. And in the end, this is what it looked like. It was 6 countries, more than 6 designers, hundreds of artisans, and we managed to bring out one product that said love, camaraderie, passion, compassion. Okay, so this is of the now. This is what we've been doing now, and it's all very modern. But my last part of this talk, and I'm going to go quickly through it because it's going to get a little intense, is I want to talk about Gandhi. And you'll wonder, why Gandhi? No one would ever imagine why Mahatma Gandhi has anything to do with fashion. But you'll be surprised, because when I was researching, I found this amazing story by Professor Gonzalez in Rome University, and it's called Half Naked Fakir. And this is the part I'm talking about, compassion. So I wanted to go back and talk about the most compassionate man, Gandhi, who in India is called the father of the nation. He was a political activist. He was a humanitarian. And he's the one who played the pivotal role in getting India freedom from British colonization. And so this essay talked about the story of Gandhi's personal search for sartorial integrity. Now, what does sartorial integrity mean? It means how transparent can you be in your morality by the choice of the clothes that you wear. And what is even more fascinating is Gandhi had a phenomenal relationship with his clothes. He had a relationship which was based on, which I'm going to get to now, so please bear with me. Khadi it still is, the hand-woven, handloom fabric. It is made by hand. It's the looms that make it. It's been in India for centuries. It is cheap. It's eco-friendly, everything. When the British colonization happened, Gandhi, when the British colonization happened, Gandhi came back to India when he was working in South Africa. He came to India and saw that the country had been ambushed. There was nothing left. All the village economies had gone. All the handicraft industries was dismantling because cotton that is produced in India, for instance, which even today, cotton is one of the largest products out of India. The British colonizers would buy all the cotton very cheaply from India and send it over to mills in England, in Lancashire, make cheap clothes out of it, bring it all the way back to India, and sell it to Indians at a very high price. So what happened was, in a country where there's village economies, where there's dyers and master craftspeople, and it was a economic unit that got dismantled because they couldn't make their own clothes, they couldn't use their own skills. So then it went completely awry, and now this is where clothes become so important. This is where Gandhi went from village to village across India, and he told them, burn the factory-made clothes that are coming from the oppressors, burn them, don't wear it. Can you imagine, in the history of my country, there was a time when the entire nation stopped buying the clothes from England, to the point where the mills in Lancashire in England, they came to a grinding halt. And when of course, there was absolute mayhem because the economics of colonization had to be questioned. And this was the first step. This was the first step of India gaining its freedom. And it was led by the Kadhi Movement. It was called the Kadhi Movement when the entire country went up in arms. Now, Gandhi led a very, his life is all about interpretation, representation. He wanted people to know what he wore is what his beliefs are all about. So through the journey of his life, the reason why one of the slides said dandy to Gandhi, because Gandhi wanted to be a dandy. He wanted to dress like an Englishman. He went to London to study law. He used all the fineries of being a gentleman. And then when he was all suited, booted, he went to South Africa to practice as a lawyer. But in South Africa, he saw Indians there, whether you were rich or poor, were completely marginalized by the government, and especially the poor Indians who were the laborers. That's when he started thinking, I'm ashamed of who I am because my clothes are not reflective of what my values should be. So this is when he wears the morning dress. He moved from his dandy clothes, his three-piece suits, and to identify with the people, the poor people in South Africa, where he played a huge role in integrating the Indians, whether you were rich or poor. They didn't like each other. The rich Indians didn't like the poor Indians, but he managed to bring them together and fight a bigoted government. So he wore the morning dress, which is white tunic, what we call kurta, and the dhoti, and he started working on the principles that I want to talk about, where there's truth force, satyagraha, truth, non-violence, self-reliance. So when he lived in Africa, he believed in community living, self-sufficiency. He went and worked as a nurse in the Boer Wars. So his whole life changed to serve other people. And his clothes were the first change that he made to visually let people know that he was making a huge change and a transformation in his life. So these are the values that he built. Let me just get this paper. I don't want to miss, because there's so much, there's very little left. So satyagraha means truth force. So when he changed his clothing, satyagraha, what is the truth in you that is going to allow you? What makes you a sustainable practitioner in fashion? It's your inner truth force. Ahimsa, non-violence. Ahimsa is at the forefront, like, whether it is the biggest economist called E.M. Schumacher that he influenced with his non-violence and ahimsa, to the Green Movement. Idea of non-violence is based on environmental respect, everything that we are here to talk about. Aparagriha, trustees of the environment. These, he said, you can read it, these are Gandhian principles that were applicable, that he talked about 100 years back. He wrote a book called My Experiments with Truth. And that was where he defined moral principles that we have to live by. And I love this quote because, it says so much about what kind of a consumer we should be. So this compassion is a big part of how we consume. What kind of a heart do we consume? And as much as we love the technology, I think questioning your ideology, questioning what your purpose is truly to be representative of a world that is kind, I think that is most important. As he said, the world has enough for everyone's needs, but not everyone's greed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.